on the 14th of July, 2022. The Managed Charging Order directed the Technical Standards Working Group, or the TSWG, to conduct research on the accuracy of devices used in the residential managed charging programs across 3 phases. These devices include charging, telematics, and managed charging software. The Technical Standards Working Group convened several meetings back over the kind of late winter and early spring and summer of this year. A series of stakeholder presentations from industry, as well as working towards determining eligibility for devices to be tested. This is what we called phase 1 of this process. Right now, we're in the midst of phase 2, where we'll be working on a research exercise that will look at device testing for testing the devices in the managed charging programs. This is to conclude by the 14th of July, 2024. And today we'll be providing an update on this process. As a reminder, phase 3, this will be a filing building on the findings of phase 1 and phase 2. Once phase 2 has wrapped up, this filing will be in the proceeding by the 1st of October, 2024. A bit of a recap on where we're at. We'll get into more details on the recap and process and progress so far. But before we do that, just the agenda for today. Again, welcome and thank you for joining today's meeting. Today we'll be going through a presentation from the Joint Utilities on a progress update for phase 2, the testing kickoff also for phase 2 of this process, and then staff will take it back with next steps on this process. Some housekeeping reminders before I hand the floor over to the Joint Utilities. Please remain muted throughout the presentation process. We will have dedicated question and answer time. But during that Q&A time, please use either the raise hand function to ask your question verbally. We love to hear your voice and hear you kind of participate in that way. But if you can't speak verbally or prefer to write it out, feel free to use the chat feature as well. The chat feature is a great opportunity to put in your questions as you're hearing the presentations, and we will try to address those questions on a first come, first served basis. Today's presentation is recorded, and the presentation materials will be posted on DMM under case number 18E007, 18E0138, pardon me. And we'll have those links also at the end of the presentation today. So with that, I'll actually hand the floor over to the Joint Utilities.
Hi, this is Chris Coy from National Grid. I'm just going to pull up some slides. Let me know if you can see them.
I can see them.
Okay, thank you. And Bianca, you're with me, it sounds like. Great.
Yep.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Coy at National Grid. I'm here with Bianca speaking on behalf of the Joint Utilities today. And we'll also be joined in a moment by some colleagues from EPRI, and we'll talk about their role in this process moving forward. Through the technical standards working group meetings over the past year, many of you might recall, we've had a number of these meetings in the first 2 quarters of the year. We were meeting on a biweekly basis for quite a while to discuss the accuracy testing initiative, proposals as far back as December of last year to discuss how we might go about that. And there's been a lot of great industry presentations and presentations from all stakeholders throughout that process. As we move forward, we need to start thinking about how are we going to implement these testing concepts to get data from both chargers or EVSE, as well as from the vehicles themselves, and potentially what you might call like third-party telematics providers. And so as we move forward in the spring, we did a request for information, an RFI, and received a lot of great feedback on that. And then in the summer, one of our last technical standards working group meetings, we provided a summary of what we learned from that and what we thought our next steps would be to keep moving this forward. And it's been, I think, a full 5 months now since we've met as a group on this topic. And we wanted to provide an update today with where we are in this process. And what we've partly been busy doing behind the scenes is working through our options to select what we would call a testing implementer, somebody who can put together a facility and a testing approach and put all the agreements in place and get all the devices and vehicles and data accesses they need to go forward with this initiative. And, I think we're pleased to report today that we do have somebody lined up to go do that. It's the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, a name many of you are probably familiar with. And so the EPRI team will speak later about their role and their background and their experience in this area. So as utilities, we have a lot of existing relationships and existing research and development work with EPRI. And among other reasons, that provided us, I think, the best chance to achieve what the PSE has asked us to do on a reasonable and efficient timeline. Not to say anything else of their high credentials coming into this, but we did work with them on other projects, and I think we're excited to get them underway on this project as well. And we are just getting started now, and so kind of moving from the gray bars, which is the background of what we've done to date, into the blue and yellow bars moving forward. EPRI is now starting to work on the behalf of the joint utilities to move the testing project forward. And again, that's across EV chargers, EV telematics, and all the devices required to really put forth a good research project on this. As we'll talk about in a minute, I think there's definitely a need and an opportunity for industry partnerships to support this, and we can talk about that more, but that spans the range from support getting us the devices we need, whether it's a charger or a vehicle, support getting access to like the telematics data that some providers have, or even just feedback on the testing protocol itself, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So it's kind of where we are now. As Jen alluded to at the beginning, we are in a timeline to adhere to the PSE's requirements. And so roughly the 1, 2, 3 of next year is going to be in the first quarter. EPRI is going to start to actually develop a more formal testing protocol, kind of a proof of concept, and also kind of get some more of the data agreements in place and device agreements in place to go do this. Testing on devices is actually a slightly harder topic than you might imagine, and so we do need to make sure that the appropriate legal and data sharing and confidentiality requirements are in place for this. We do hope to resolve almost all of that in the next 2 months, roughly by February 15th. The second quarter, then, I think we want to move forward with, okay, now we've got everything in place, we've got a proof of concept and a testing protocol. The hope is to go forward and actually kind of conduct the formal testing for that. And the goal we've given EPRI so far is to conduct all of that by Memorial Day, basically the end of May. The deadline we are up against for the PSE is July 14th, so there is some wiggle room there, but we're hoping to finish everything essentially by Memorial Day next year. And then finally, again, as Jen alluded to prior, there is a phase 3 of this that the DPS will submit kind of a comprehensive report to the PSE by October of next year that includes the lessons learned from these prior phases, as well as other considerations. So it's kind of the 1, 2, 3 quarter layout of next year, and we'll talk about some of these steps in more detail in a moment. But with that, I think we just want to give the EPRI team a chance to introduce themselves and talk about their experience. And so, Tom, if you'd like to take it away, please go for it.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you guys can hear me okay. Just wanted to give a brief introduction, and we're, as Chris has said, we're getting ready to get into this project and get kick-started with mainly for the procurement side of that, but wanted just to introduce everybody that's going to be on the team. You might hear from some of these people throughout the project as we present on the work being done. So we're mainly composed of 2 separate areas within the EPRI program. So we have the transportation program and power quality. And power quality has gotten involved in this testing because we have in the past been involved with a lot of testing efforts in guiding different testing standards, such as and help with some ANSI standards for revenue metering. We've got involved in the past where there was some distortion capabilities within the meters that were being ignored, even in the testing standards. So we were involved in helping through IEEE, IEC, and ANSI in guiding the actual measurements that need to be taken as part of that, and actually sit on some of these committees and helped with that development as part of that. So when you look at some of these testing standards, some people from EPRI have sat on some of these committees and helped guided some of that. Myself, I'll be taking the project lead on this. My background, again, is in power quality, most specifically with power quality monitoring and data analytics. I've had focus outside of this, again, with revenue metering and also with straight voltage in the New York area, and have worked closely with Con Ed and other New York utilities in the power quality sector. The next person that will be helping that you probably heard the name of is John Hollowell, and he is a Senior Technical Executive in the EPRI Transportation, and he will be kind of the lead side for the transportation and getting the contacts and agreements in place for the vehicles. The power quality side will be focusing primarily on test and measurement and procurement and setting up lab space and putting that all together for the testing protocol that we come up with as part of that. Another significant team member is Letitia Midmore, should be on the call. She is our strategic accounts executive. She'll be leading with helping us get the different devices that require telematics and written agreements with different providers to access those. We know there might be a little bit of a struggle with that, so we'll have somebody on our team that can help us in putting together those different agreements together to be able to access those different data points. So, and we have other people on the team, especially from transportation, that are going to be technical advisors. And we also have our test and measurement advisors as part of the team. One, I don't know if you've heard of the 80+ power supply testing program. That's Peyton Sizemore leads the program for that. So we've got a good team. Just included some information on the bottom here, just showing some of the ties into some of this area, and specifically wanted to add in the knowledge transfer as part of this. So that's something that we're always eager to collaborate with the utilities and also the vendors that work with utilities and transferring that knowledge. And we look forward to working with you guys in putting this together. So any questions, feel free to open up, or if we're waiting to the end, Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, great. And, just to give a little bit more color to what the EPRI team has on their plate and what we've asked them to do, this gives a little bit more color to the timeline we sketched out a moment ago. And so we can walk through this together, and Tom, please feel free to add in any other commentary here. But again, we're just getting started from a contractual project point of view, but in essence, the first two bullets here, device procurements and agreements and proof of concept testing, are about to start kind of in parallel with each other. The EPRI team is going to get started to kind of test the edges of what we understand of how metering accuracy might vary across these devices, whether it's a charger or from the vehicle or from the telematics systems. So we think there's some more learning before we establish kind of a formal testing process, and that's built into their framework, is to kind of test what we know, test some hypotheses of does the battery state of charge matter, does temperature matter? Not to put them on the spot for what things might matter here, but we've gotten a lot of good feedback from stakeholders throughout this process of, hey, you should consider X, Y, or Z, and I think we agree, and that's why we've tried to build that into their statement of work here. Along the side, though, we also need to make sure that we have agreements to get, again, the vehicles, the chargers, the data accesses required to actually conduct the testing. Some of you might recall that over the summer, we started to discuss the fact that, hey, getting a large number of vehicles can be a challenge of itself. Just the logistical and financial hurdles are significant. And so we talked through kind of the priority lists of vehicles that we were hoping to test. And so the EPRI team now kind of has that on their plate to also move forward in terms of obtaining devices, obtaining chargers or vehicles, or again, telematics accesses where necessary. And that's kind of moving in parallel. And so getting the devices and building out the proof of concept and the test protocol are kind of going to move side by side for the next, let's call it 2 months, with a hope to, move both of those forward and move into the more, what I would call more formal EV or EVSE testing, which will form the basis of kind of the results of the testing results that we want to report on in the spring time period. Following that, we've asked the EPRI team to kind of be on call following that testing period, just because we think there's going to be a real value in having them around to answer questions that come up or attend future technical standards working group meetings as well. And so we don't want to lose Tom and team too quickly, so they will be around. Tom, is there anything you want to add or anything you'd like to speak to regarding the chart on the right?
No, I think that covers it. The one thing that you and I talked about in the very beginning, just to kind of get in the technical level here, is having Plan Bs as part of this. I know from my part, from our measurement, we haven't talked much about measuring, directly from the CAN bus and gathering measurements directly. Just based on what I've worked with in the past and collecting my own data in the EV, is that some of that data, as it aggregates up to those levels of telematics, there may be some changes that are done, through processing. And so, we plan on, in addition to focusing on the telematics side, because that's where, at the end of the day, that's what matters for you guys, at least from the joint utilities and the ease of these measurements. But we want to understand also from the CAN bus side, at least local measurements along with what we're measuring with our meters and tracing it through and making sure there's no changes. So we will be doing that. So I just wanted to throw that out there if anybody had any comments on that or focus or other areas, that we should maybe look at. So far it's, we're looking at direct measurements with our own meters as the testing standard, some local measurements that are provided, the EV, EVSE, providers that may provide that locally if available. And then to point to the telematics, whether that's through the OEM of the EV or EVSE or third-party vendors as part of that. So we know there may be other areas too that we could focus on. And for us, it's more about understanding, what changes may occur. For example, in the past where I've worked with third-party vendors with meter data, is that they'll do some processing and aggregation on the fly that will change the accuracy, the number of decimal points, for example, or instead of doing 1 minute data collection at the car on telematics side, it may be every 15 minutes where you have min-max average values. So that changes things in the accuracy as part of that. So it's small things like that we'll be looking at to consider. So I just wanted to throw that out if we need some discussion on that.
Thanks, Tom. And maybe just 2 more things to add in for this slide as we keep going. The first is the chart on the right has a little bit of green text beneath it. It might be a little bit small, but we have been working closely with Department of Public Service staff as we've moved this project forward. And something that's been important to them, and we want to make sure was captured here, was just the fact that EPRI will be using instruments that are traceable to NIST and have up-to-date calibration records. And some of the certifications are listed there on these slides, will be posted afterwards as well. And so we just want to give people confidence that essentially the metering and points of comparison here will be very accurate and trustworthy for some good learnings. The second thing I want to call out was in earlier meetings and in the RFI we issued in the spring, there was a question of what is the best way to go about testing this? Should it be kind of field testing? We heard from like New York State Weights and Measures around their efforts to go do field testing of public chargers and testing against NIST Handbook 44. Or should it be more like laboratory-based testing where we try and get all the equipment in one place and we can maybe control the settings a bit more carefully? Just to be extra clear, EPRI is planning to do laboratory-based testing out of their Knoxville, Tennessee laboratory. That made sense for a number of reasons, and Tom and others can speak to those. But I think it was just a question of best use of their time as experts to not be traveling around to a bunch of different chargers, and much greater control of both the equipment, which again we are testing on, and often that runs afoul of things like terms and conditions if you're not careful. And so this will be laboratory-based testing, which I think will give us more flexibility and more opportunity to kind of learn what's going on here. And so I just wanted to close that out because we have discussed both options in the past. So.
Yeah. And that's the thing. We got to learn to crawl before we walk or run. And doing this in the lab environment first is going to answer some questions. And certainly, down the road, as we get through this proof of concept first and create the procedure itself, we want to keep in mind that this would be conducted in the field. And so, down the road, as we're done with this, we can talk about doing that later. So I think it makes sense for us to do this in this environment. And as Chris said, we do have, NIST traceability for these measurements that we're doing for comparison. So we know where we're at as far as that accuracy. And also we will be looking at, although, we'll approach it with a little bit of a fresh mind, but we still will be considering things like ANSI C12 for meter testing, also the NIST 44 handbook. That's, things have already been looked at as part of some of this testing, especially on the EVSE side. And so we'll keep those things in consideration, but we do want to come at it with a little bit of a fresh set first, and then compare that and see what we have against the other type of testing standards in this area.
Any other comments before we move on? If not, Bianca, do you want to take this part?
Yep. So Bianca here from Con Edison. Chris talked a little bit about earlier progress update, more on a detailed level of our timeline, but I will be focusing more on, what is our estimated timeline and some key milestones for opportunities for stakeholder feedback. Starting in December to January, right, we're hosting our working group meeting to kick off our testing initiative. Really key takeaway and ask here. EPRI is still seeking source testing equipment partners, ideally by January 15th. This is so that we are able to have conversations and any sort of pertinent conversations prior to starting testing. So just want to call that out there. Following into February, we're going to be holding another working group meeting where we'll be able to share initial testing results, and again, open for stakeholder feedback there. On our end, we'll be aiming to have completed initial testing and establish our final protocol, as well as complete any data agreements. Moving on to May, we expect to have concluded testing. And lastly, by October, we'll be hosting another working group meeting where we can share our final testing results and thus concluding our DPS Phase 3 report. So this is all I have here for this slide. We can move on to the next one. And opening up for discussion right now, but again, calling out that EPRI is still accepting partnerships for the testing initiative. Some of the key relationships and partnerships we're looking for are with vehicle OEMs, specifically loaner vehicles, as well as sharing data agreements and advice as always within our EVSC partners, right? So specifically a loaner DCFC device, as well as a data sharing agreement, and lastly, managed charging providers. Again, data is a really key aspect of what we're doing here, and always open to feedback. And again, as I mentioned, there is a limited window for new inputs or partnerships before we start the testing. So if anybody is interested in engaging with us today or by January 15th, feel free to message, email the joint utilities, info@jointutiliesofny.org, or if it's more works better for the company, right, can reach out directly to APRI, to either Tom Cook or John Halliwell. We heard Tom Cook speaking today, so can reach out to them directly as well. That is all, Chris, that I had to share. Feel free to jump in if I missed anything.
I was just going to add one last thing, which was maybe just spending a minute to talk about kind of what will the public reporting of the testing look like, and maybe if Jen or staff could weigh in on this as well, that would be great. But at the moment, I think our expectations are that, number one, we definitely want, as Bianca said, we definitely want industry basically to feel supportive of this initiative in a number of ways. That said, I think we're welcome to folks' suggestions of the level of perhaps confidentiality they might be comfortable with to engage in this sort of effort. We do expect there to be a public report that gets filed that includes, in essence, the results and the quantitative findings. That doesn't, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it says, device manufacturer's name, accuracy result. I think there's some level of anonymization that we're expecting to do in the public report, just to ensure that folks feel comfortable to come to the table with this sort of stuff. And again, this is all for kind of research and development, state of the market benchmarking efforts. It's not to directly qualify or disqualify anybody from participation in the state's managed charging programs. And so this is really to learn more and to see how we can, I think, put everybody on better footing for these sorts of data needs that the state and the utility has in the future. And so if you do have some sort of kind of public release of results or confidentiality question, I think that's something that we're all happy to talk through in more detail. But there will be some sort of public results made, but I think the level of specificity is something that we're still trying to narrow down.
Yeah, Chris, one thing I'd add on my end, there'll definitely be a public-facing filing by early October. There may be other stuff in the record in the proceeding prior to that as well. I think that's still TBD and depends largely on how this process goes and what the results look like and what the consolidation of those results look like. We're definitely open to conversations with partners and what level of confidentiality would be necessary for participation. I think those will be discussions that we'll need to kind of navigate and talk through as a group too. A big part of this process is making sure we have transparency for stakeholders. So as a stakeholder on the line, expect to see more technical standards working group throughout the research process. We'll be popping back up, and likely a combination of the utilities and EPRI will be sharing a bit more on their results, kind of where the research is at. We have, I think at this point, pretty limited time-wise ability to pivot at this point. We're really kind of trying to get up and running and started as quickly as feasible. But I think that this is a good opportunity to bring up any questions if the presentation's wrapped up, as well as any thoughts from stakeholders too. But trying to make this transparent, so definitely look out for more information from this group. Anything else in the presentation, or should we pivot to Q&A, Chris and Bianca and Tom?
I believe that's it for us, and so I think we're happy to pivot to the Q&A.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we're keeping as usual. I know a lot of you have been on these calls in the past. Thanks for the thumbs up, Tom. I know many of you have been on these working groups in the past. For those of you who have not, we do take questions through the chat, through hand raises. So we're keeping our eyes peeled on the chat for any questions. I don't see any in there so far. I'm scrolling up through a few messages here. But please, again, feel free to raise your hand so you can unmute and ask a question verbally, or throw something in the chat if you want to ask a question of staff or the JU or the EPRI team. All right, seeing no questions come in so far. Maybe people are still typing, or I know this is a bit of an update, so it's possible folks are just absorbing where we're at. I will pull the slides back up so I can talk through some of the next steps on our EV proceedings kind of writ large, and we'll still keep eyes peeled on the chat and hand raises in case there are any questions, but we may be able to wrap up a little early too if nothing else from stakeholders. Talking through next steps here, and I use this as an opportunity to put a plug in for some of the action happening on our other program within the 18E0138. And we have an upcoming stakeholder session on the midpoint review order. It will be an overview of what was in the order, which was authorized in November of 2023. The overview will be a webinar format that will be on Thursday, December 21st, 2023 at 1 p.m. Eastern. All filings for this proceeding, whether it's the Make Ready program or for managed charging, are in 18E0138. The managed charging specific filings are under a matter number 22-02356. This is on DMM, or the Department's Document and Matter Management System. This should be linked in the slides here as well. And you can contact us at evsc@dps.ny.gov. I'm going to also just take this opportunity to just do a brief recap on where we're at on our EV proceedings. I know some of you tend to join the Technical Standards Working Group, but maybe don't join our other working group meetings or other related webinars. So I want to, again, use this as an opportunity to update you all on where we're at across our EV proceedings. Again, we have 18E0138. This is linked here and the slides as well. We can throw the link to that in the chat as well before we wrap up. But this is the Make Ready program, which primarily funds electrical infrastructure needed to install EV charging of programs targeted to disadvantaged communities. This just had the midpoint review order, as mentioned, so kind of more details will be shared on what's in there at the upcoming webinar. Residential managed charging programs, incentivizing customers to charge their vehicles off-peak at home when there are less impacts on the grid. I hope that you're all well aware of these programs and the device testing that is underway at this point. There's also the beneficial rates for EVs. This is also called the Demand Charge Alternatives Proceeding, 22E0236. Within that, we have kind of three buckets of programs. We have commercial managed charging, which provides incentives to customers who charge their vehicles off-peak with a focus on fleets and public stations. We have a immediate solution to demand charges being a barrier to DCFC deployment across New York. So we have a rebate that reduces the demand portion of a customer's bill by 50% for some EV charging use cases. And we're underway going through the authorization for EV phase-in rates, which are time of use rate with demand charges blended in over time as a customer's load factor increases. Last but definitely not least, our newest proceeding, electrifying trucks and buses, as well as planning for EV charging load, 23E0070. TBD on what this program or incentive or a suite of other related regulations will look like. The initiating order for this was in April of 2023. The goal is to address challenges to truck and bus electrification, as well as practically planning for load from EV charging. And the technical conference will be, we have had actually 3 technical conferences that have been held through this proceeding. One was on the 26th of October on medium and heavy duty. There was one on the 2nd of November on proactive planning, and then another one on November 9th, which was also on proactive planning. More engagements to come on this, so we're looking forward to sharing more on this proceeding as it develops. So before we wrap up for today, I'm going to throw a few links in the chat for those 3 proceedings, just to make sure it's on everyone's radar. Hopefully, many of you, if not all of you, are aware of these 3, and many of you are signed up as a party or otherwise in these proceedings, but want to make sure that folks know what's going on beyond the device testing initiative. So I'm going to throw these links in the chat, and we'll pause for any additional questions. And if none come in, we'll wrap up for the day.
You know, maybe just to add one final note, I think EPRI team with some JU support will be starting some outreach quite shortly to some of the industry partners, including some of the folks I see on the line here, just to move forward kind of the partnership need. And so I think some of the folks on the call might be hearing from them shortly, but we also welcome outreach going the other way from you to us. And so thanks again for everybody for attending.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so no questions come in. Thank you everyone for your time. Thank you to the utilities and EPRI for the presentation today. And we'll throw our email in the chat as well. Thanks, Lauren, for throwing those in for the JU and for EPRI. I'll put ours in the chat as well. And thank you for your time, everyone.